Hello and welcome to Woman Power Season 2. Today we have an extraordinary woman in studio joining us all the way from New York over Zoom, Pflum. She is a 5 times Emmy Award-winning journalist and producer. She has a New York Times Best-Selling Author Award. She has also won the Peabody Award, the Writers Guild of America Award, the DuPont Award, and the Edward Morrow Award. Wow, such a long list of accolades. And then the most extraordinary of all, she is married to the love of her life and she has 4 children. So you are doing all this as a mother of 4. Wow, well done.
Thank you.
That is incredible. Mary, I read your book. It's called White Dresses. It's a memoir. It is an absolute extraordinary story. I have to tell you, while reading this book, I had so much respect for you as a journalist because you went so deep into your family's history. You must have asked a plethora of people for information. How did you get all the information about your family history, and was it hard hearing some of the stories?
Well, thank you very much. I am very grateful to be with you. I love being able to talk to wonderful people like you about my book and about the experiences. I'm a big believer in paying it forward, and that was part of writing the book, was hopefully paying it forward a little bit to my own children and grandchildren, giving them some family history. And I found also to people who read it who might have some similar experiences of complicated families, is the way I like to describe it. I know some say dysfunctional, I say complicated, very loving, but a complicated family that certainly growing up, I felt like wasn't like, the next door neighbors. My family was very supportive of me writing the book. I was very fortunate. So when you ask about, how I put together things with my talking to so many family members, I'm very grateful that they were willing to let me interview them. I wore my journalist hat for memoirs are often, they're your recollections, but I wanted as a journalist to be as factually accurate as I could be. Obviously I had my own memories of what happened growing up, but I wanted to really be as accurate as I could be because, memories are such funny things. You can remember a family event one way, and certainly as a child, it's kind of distorted, but what happened, I wanted to piece together by talking to aunts and uncles. My mother's brothers and sisters were very, very helpful. She had a cousin that was very helpful to me. And very much talking to my father was extraordinarily helpful because no one knows what goes on inside of a marriage, including children. They're so small, they're so young, except really for the couple. And my mother had passed away. That's was kind of what sparked me to write the book. And so I really could only talk to my father about what happened. And he was so giving of his time and information and told me things very personal that I talk about in the book. And I could not have put together the chapter that dealt with my mother's wedding dress and their marriage, and then the dissolution of their marriage, had I not had my father's not only full support, but really his bravery in terms of sharing some things that he recognized were not necessarily going to be entirely flattering when it came to him, but he felt like it was important. He recognized what I was trying to do. He recognized that I was putting together the story of 3 generations of women in a very complicated family. And he recognized that he certainly had a role to play in all of it. He also gave me information about my mother's time in the convent and the trauma that she went through that I would never have known about had he not shared, because my mother's time in the convent was so traumatizing to her. It's something she never, ever wanted to really talk about with me at all, even as an adult. And so she would talk to me in little tiny bits and pieces. So I'm very, very grateful.
Story, I mean, it's one thing to put together a story of a family, but your family was, like you say, definitely complicated. I absolutely loved how in depth you started with your grandmother, really, and just the extraordinary road that she was on. I mean, she married the love of her life as well. She had quite a large family. Your mom was one of a large family, but then your grandmother had a lot of miscarriages, and that seemed to really affect her, a lot. And as I, gathered from the book, the one that really, I don't want to say break her, but really caused the root of severe depression was the fact that one of her babies lived for 2 days, if I'm not mistaken, and then died, right? And your mom had to deal with all that. Do you think that the depression of her mom and not being able to deal with that depression was part of the cause of the issues that your mom had? Because your mom also suffered from severe depression as well.
Yes, I think there's certainly a hereditary aspect as well as, yes. I mean, so I think there was a situational for both my grandmother and my mother that they were dealing with extraordinary things in their lives. You mentioned my grandmother, all the miscarriages, but it was as well, I mean, certainly the depression, and she'd grown up very poor and wasn't able to fulfill a lot of her dreams, which was not unusual, to be clear, for women of that time. But certainly there was a lot of trauma there. And then, yes, and then I think there was a predisposition. We know that from other family members. And then my mother, yes, going through that, I think, and that's what's so interesting, right, about so many families, not just mine by any stretch. It's so interesting when you take that step back and you can see some of the patterns. It's so interesting how, to a degree, history repeats itself in unfortunate ways, but then sometimes in really wonderful ways too.
Yes.
Because my grandmother and my mother both loved to write and were very gifted writers. And I feel like I got a lot of that from them. And there was a lot of love. There was a lot of love. There was a lot of faith. So there were the good things, but yes, to answer your question, absolutely. I think anytime a child sees trauma like that isn't treated, which of course back then, mental health wasn't treated or talked about even. Maybe it was treated to a degree, but then it was very hush hush. It was obviously a far cry from the way it is now, where if someone may be exhibiting signs of depression, or in the case of my grandmother, I think, yes, that last loss, would have been my uncle Kevin, who of course I would never get to know. He would only lived a couple of days, but those were in the days where I still don't think we're where we should be, right? When it deals, when we're talking about maternal loss. I mean, don't we still hear this all the time, that women feel like, unfortunately, miscarriages or stillbirths are still this very taboo subject because people don't know what to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just not dealing with the issues. Do you think that if your grandmother had better tools and people around her and skills to deal with her depression, it might have impacted your mother's life in a different way? Because it really did affect your mom quite severely.
It did. And my mother often talked about, I mean, she had great love for both of her parents, but she always said, she used the terminology, she felt like she couldn't reach her mother. And it was interesting talking to her siblings. My mother was the oldest of six, Catholic family. The first five were born in 6.5 years, very close together. Then there was a big gap with all those miscarriages and the child that lived just a couple of days. And then finally came my Uncle Mike, the baby. But during that time, the siblings said they felt like actually that my mother was pretty close to her mother, but my mother, even what their view was of close, my mother felt like there was this great chasm. And she talked about it. She talked about it often, that she felt like that, and the siblings did too, that something just happened where a part of my grandmother, very brilliant. I've heard many stories of, and I got to experience some of it. She was good to me. We would talk about books. We would talk about, she had a hat collection. She was lovely, but I think a part of her for self-preservation, which I think is human nature for a lot of people. She just kind of went inward
Yeah.
instead of outward to kind of self-preservation. And I think at a certain point, right, everybody's got a breaking point. And I think if you go through loss after loss after loss, there are those amazing individuals that can keep getting back up. But I think some people, especially if they don't have the tools of a good mental health care provider, or just friends you can trust to
Yeah.
really lean on, I think at some point you just, a part of you, I hate to say it, if it doesn't die, it may just go numb, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a coping mechanism, but that's what
Absolutely.
happened. So
Yeah.
yes, and to answer your question, I think my mother really needed some help as well. And suddenly there was a situation where she's one of six. She's got a mother she can't reach. Even if her mother could reach her, her hands are very full. The family doesn't have any money. And I think, yes, my mother had a lot of signs of depression and nobody knew quite what to do with it. Also, when you're in a Catholic family like that, I think one of the solutions is, just pray, right? And I think that in part was why she wound up going into the convent,
Mm.
because I think she honestly thought, a part of her, that this was going to be solve a lot of problems, right? She graduated from
Absolutely.
college. What do women do when they want to, make a difference in the world? There weren't many options. It was be a teacher or be a nun, or wife, certainly. And a mother, she had broken up with a college boyfriend. And I think she thought maybe she'd feel better and would be making a lot of people happy, a lot of people in her very Catholic family proud. And maybe, if she got lucky, I think she was probably thinking maybe the depression would go away. So,
Absolutely. And I think just to be seen, I hear what you're saying. It felt to her maybe that she couldn't reach her mom. And just for her mom to be proud of her, it's like I think every child just wants to have their parents see them and say, oh, I'm so proud of you. You're so amazing. Because your mom, I mean, she excelled in school. And from going to such a brilliant prospect, her world was her oyster in front of her. She won numerous accolades. I mean, you can elaborate on that. And then from there, she went into the convent, which really almost destroyed her life from there on.
absolutely. She had won, they still have these programs. It was called Girls State. So first, it's a means of high school juniors studying government, and they gather, each state has a program. You have to be selected. You're generally at or near the top of your class, which she was in high school. And then she was selected in Indiana's Girls State to go to Girls Nation, which means she met the then president and got to meet with him privately in the Rose Garden. So there are pictures of her with then President Truman. And she was very much on that. She excelled academically. She excelled socially, in that she was, I think, more popular than she realized, but she wasn't necessarily that, not the popular cheerleader, but the very bright newspaper editor and whatnot. So she had a lot going for her, but she didn't have self-confidence. She didn't have self-esteem. Again, these are not things that I'm at all suggesting makes my family unique. These are very common things, but it was kind of a perfect storm when she decided that she thought giving herself to God and becoming a nun or a bride of Christ, which is why she wore that white dress. Many people may not know. I did not know until I did know a short time before my mother died, but that when nuns become nuns, they actually wear wedding dresses to become brides of Christ. So she wore a white dress. And so for background about my book is called White Dresses because white dresses were very significant in my family. A lot of Catholic families. Again, this doesn't necessarily, I'm not at all suggesting this is extraordinary, but in my family, white dresses were very, very important, as they are in many Catholic families, where my mother considered them something of heirlooms, the white dresses that we wore on the different days.
You went through quite severe trauma yourself as a child because of your mom's depression. I mean, your parents split up because your dad came out in a time where it was completely unknown. You know, he just came out and said, I'm gay, in a small town, divorced your mom. And yeah, you were young at the time. How old were you and how did this affect your life?
I was 5 when he left. I did not know he was gay, really. I mean, I had clues, but he did not fully tell me until I was in high school. My parents, you know, I think they tried to tell us what they thought we could handle. But prior to him coming out as gay, so I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin, very a pretty conservative town. I should say very, but pretty darn conservative. And certainly back when he came out, it was not something that fathers did, especially my father was a solid businessman. He was, the guy that, very active in clubs like the Lions Club, selling oranges, going door to door. He was a lector reading every week at Sunday Mass. He was that guy at the pancake breakfast and he was that guy that, drove the station wagon and seemed like the responsible dad on the Christmas cards. He's Republican, card carrying Republican, proudly supported Ronald Reagan. He was a big Reagan guy. So all of these things were going on that ran counter to what people thought a gay person was. And then on top of it, he was coming out, going, into the height of the AIDS epidemic. So it was a time where there was a heightened sense of homophobia. There'd always been homophobia, of course, but then suddenly people felt like if they shared a meal with a gay person or swam in the same pool, there was just a lot of cruelty. So
a lot of judgment as well, right? A lot of judgment.
Oh, so much judgment and so much whispering. So I did not know. I mean, there were some moments that they make me cry from my mother more than me, but I remember her being shunned. I mean, people can be so cruel. Women can be so cruel, going to banks and grocery stores and, women being so rude in front of me as a child saying, I haven't seen your husband lately, that catty, they knew and I didn't know. And then I didn't know why my mom was crying and I didn't know why, I was frozen out of or made fun of in certain circles. Girls at slumber parties were mean. They would ask me lots of questions about my dad. He would still come to functions. He held his head high. My mother held her head high. My mother supported. I should really know that was extraordinary too, way before her time. My father came out to my mother after the second suicide attempt. I was very small. I knew something was very wrong. I didn't know. He was in a mental ward of a hospital about an hour's drive from our home. So what I remember was sitting, with my older brother. I mean, we would sit what felt like hours. I don't think it was probably as long as it felt like when you're a kid, waiting in waiting rooms because my mother couldn't afford childcare and we had no family around. So those were the moments, I remember that something was very wrong. And then when we would see my father, he was crying. And then when he came out to my mother, which I wouldn't find out about till later, he was really ashamed. I think he wanted to still end his life. And my father tells a story that she took his hand in hers and said, and she was still devastated, but she really saw the bigger picture of he needed love, not judgment.
Not judgment, always, right? Because that is the key, not to judge. Just love.
It's hard to put yourself there, right? Where she was looking at, oh gosh,
Such a strong woman, I think, from her side. It's so honorable because when you're in that pain, for her to be able to be the bigger person and do that, that is extremely inspiring. It really inspired me as well. What can people do, as friends in situations like this where they might not understand, people's choices and situations, to be rather supportive and kind than judgmental, because I do think that is also part of what caused your mom's depression to be worse, is the severe judgment and the rejection that she had to endure the whole
Oh,
time.
it was humiliation, right?
Mm.
I mean, having to go through that, and I marvel that she didn't move us. Apparently she thought about it and was worried it would be more traumatic for my brother and I, because we went to a wonderful, I can't say enough good about the little elementary school that we went to. It was kind of something almost out of Little House on the Prairie. It wasn't, but it was a school nestled in the country, and very good teachers and home cooked meals. And I think the teachers knew the lay of the land and knew what was going on, but they were so supportive. They inspired me to write. They encouraged my writing. They encouraged my brother. I think my mother worried if she pulled us out of that little community, we would be further traumatized. The sad part is, to your point, I think if she had moved closer to her own family, she had a
Yeah.
couple of siblings, for example, that both lived in Colorado. She had thought about moving us out there. If she had done that, the short term would have been hard for my brother and I, but the long term, I think, would have been better for everybody, in that she would have had more support. Because you're very right. And it hurts to even look back about how alone she must have felt.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. I mean, even now, I mean, it's hard for, the stories are out there. People are much more open now.
Mm.
We know how many people, their spouses, may have come out after a marriage, and it's a blow to the ego. It's a blow to esteem. It's a blow to the family. It's an adjustment period. But I can't imagine going through that back then and feeling that alone. And then on top of it, she had the financial struggles that so many women know when the husband leaves, and suddenly, she had to go back to work. And then, like so many women understand, she had then to go back to not only work, but go back to school to get she had to get accredited to teach in the state of Wisconsin. So at one point she was going to school full-time and working full-time and raising us, and suffering from depression and not being able to talk to most people. I think a lot of friends turned their backs on her because, to answer your question, I think they didn't know what to say. I think she didn't know who to trust. I think she was burned by some people she did tell. And maybe we've all had that happen, right? You tell one person, you beg them not to tell, they tell one person, and then suddenly the one person tells one person tells one person, and suddenly everyone's staring at you. And because people were cruel back then, the conventional wisdom was it was okay to mock or whisper. She gave all of her energy to being a really great mom and being so loving, but then there was nothing left for her. So that was the sad part.
That's very sad. Mary, we have about a minute left.
Oh no.
I think what is profound for me in your book, and I would really encourage viewers to read this book. It is such an extraordinary story, but what really is special for me is the way you took your story and brought the memories of the white dresses into the story, and that was so profound. It was so beautiful, and that the fact is that we can always see something beautiful even through pain, even through difficult circumstances, and that's something that we can carry on to our kids, which you've definitely done through this extraordinary, beautiful story. It's a legacy of hope now, and not only a painful story anymore, and that's very, very special. What final advice would you give to people out there? Because you tried to help your mother. She was a hoarder, and it was almost impossible to help her. She just didn't want help. She would refuse to see the problem. So how can we help other people out there that have issues like this, that don't want to be helped? It seems impossible, but is there a way?
Hoarding, for anyone out there who has a family member who's a hoarder, my heart goes out to you. And I will tell you, I mean, having done the research, they're still trying to figure out, for one thing, why people hoard, getting to the source of it. So often they think it goes back to some childhood trauma or some kind of loss. And that was certainly the case for my mother. So the difficult part is getting help, first of all, for them, for the root cause of what loss they may have, they may be fighting or overcoming, and then the recognition that that has materialized into hoarding, and that by cleaning up and cleaning out, that their identity is not being taken away. Because in the case of my mother, I think it became like, especially after she lost both of her parents, she was already hoarding prior to that time, all through me growing up, and it got worse and worse. And as I talk about in the book, not being able to invite friends over, it being a real source of shame from my brother and I, the seemingly very bright and capable students, and doing well, and in all kinds of areas of our lives, but having this deep, dark secret that no one could talk about, besides my dad being gay, the hoarding. But what I would say is, the more love you can give, and not going to great extremes and giving into the temptation of trying to clean everything out. The problem when you do that is you can make the problem even worse, and you could wind up losing your relationship with your loved one. So the big thing is getting them some help, and trying to turn to some professionals for kind of the step-by-step guide. There are some folks out there, and if anyone wants to go, you could check reach out to me through my website, maryflumpeterson.com. I'm always happy to point people in the direction of some of the professionals that are out there that are doing some really great research.
Thank you, Mary. That's absolutely amazing. Thank you so much for joining us in studio today. From me, Lorna Grayling, that's it. We will see you next week. I will put all the details for this book on the screen. You can go and check it out. It's on Amazon or on Mary's website if you want to reach out to her, if you want some advice. This is an extraordinary story. Please go and read it. And until next week, bye-bye.